Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. It is 7 o'clock on Wednesday, 2/23/22. We just missed our 2/22/22. But I'm very excited tonight to be here with Mark Leslie. I am a member of the Friends of Cumston Library, and we are sponsoring this program tonight. And this is being presented by the Cumston Public Library here in Monmouth, Maine. And Julie is not able to do the introduction this evening because she's busy with the selectmen's meeting here in town. But so I just wanted to introduce Mark. He is a longtime journalist, and he's actually a winner of 6 National Magazine Writing Awards. He's actually written 13 books, including his latest, which was released last November, which is called A Cause Most Splendid, The Battle for the Bible. And it's a story behind the illegal printing of Bibles of the American Revolutionary troops in 1777, with the British troops hunting down the Continental Congress's brave printer, Robert Aitken. So that's an exciting thing. I'm excited to read that myself. You can find all of his books at his website, which is markallenleslie.com, and we'll be putting that on our Facebook pages as well, so that you can access that or contact Julie at the library. And they're also available at Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, and actually including Maine's own Sherman's Books, which we love that bookstore if you've ever been there. His historical novel, True North, Tice's story, started him actually on the research that he's going to be sharing with us tonight. Of course, Cumston Public Library does have a collection of all of his 9 historical and contemporary novels. So if you're interested in getting those and checking those out there, and I'm going to now turn it over to Mark, and so he can share with us this wonderful presentation about the Underground Railroad, not only in Maine, but right here in Monmouth.
Tice stood at the banks of the swiftly flowing Ohio River, contemplating his future, or the end of it. The man with a gun chasing him close behind. Try to swim the river, he'd drown. Stay here, he'd get whipped half to death, or maybe all the way to death. That's what happened to runaway slaves. Now, runaway slaves weren't the only ones who had to fear revenge for their escape in the 1800s. And this story we're going to share today is about those people who created the extraordinary and highly illegal network of safe houses across America. Now, especially in Maine, from Kittery to the county, and with a nod to 4 special families right here in Monmouth. Many of the people involved in this Underground Railroad simply decided that they answered to a higher authority than Congress or the state legislatures. Others were driven simply by the belief that all men deserve to be free. But whatever their reasons, they spelled danger. So thousands, thousands of white and black free men and women who formed America's extraordinary network called the Underground Railroad helped some 140,000 slaves escape to freedom from roughly 1800 until Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Declaration of Emancipation Declaration. Do I have it? There we go. Now, you may think that there's never been so much tension and division in America, incivility, animosity, as there is in 2022. Mobs taking control of entire sections of cities, shootings in synagogues and churches, threats and violence in the streets, even in the halls of Congress. You may think it's never been this bad before, but let me take you back in time. Because to understand the dangers facing these people involved in the Underground Railroad, you have to know the time in which they lived. To truly know how treacherous a business this was, we have to put ourselves right in that period of time between, let's go back further there, between 1804 and after the 1860s. When hatred for the blacks and Catholics and Jews invaded Maine, people witnessed the first Daylight Klan parade in Milo in 1923. And all the way to the early mid-1800s when the Underground Railroad operated. Getting my slides mixed up here, but I want to take you back to that period of time when life or death duels were fought, like this depiction of the deadly Aaron Burr Alexander Hamilton face-off on July 11th, 1804. And that time when gunslingers fought and decided who would win an argument by guns. You had an argument, you didn't know what would happen. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that in between those periods of time, the dueling Alexander Hamilton and the gunslinging days of Wyatt Earp, that Joan Freeman in her book, The Field of Blood, she said that Congress itself was rife with conflict. Legislative sessions were routinely punctuated by mortal threats, canings, flipped desks, and all-out slugfests. This is Congress. Congressmen drew pistols, they waved Bowie knives at their rivals, and many were bullied in the attempt to intimidate them into compliance or silence, particularly on the issue of slavery. One legislative chamber erupted into a massive fist-throwing, spittoon-tossing battle royal. And by 1860, armed congressmen fully expected bloody combat while in the House. In fact, Maine Congressman Jonathan Silly, he was from Thomaston, he was a Democrat. He was killed in 1838 by a Whig colleague, William Graves, in an infamous duel that grabbed the headlines all across the country. Jonathan Silly. To give you an idea of the magnitude of the difference between the North and the South, I have this woodcut from the abolitionist publication called Anti-Slavery Almanac. It was 1839. And it depicts the capture of a fugitive slave by a slave patrol, while night watch groups were established in the northern colonies. Groups of white men organized into what they called slave patrols in the southern colonies. Never heard of these before in school. Now, these slave patrols were responsible for controlling, returning, and punishing runaway slaves. The slave patrols helped to maintain the economic order in the southern colonies. Now, these slave patrols are generally considered to be the very first modern police organizations in America. And listen to this, 1837 in Charleston, South Carolina, beautiful city, love it. They had a slave patrol with more than 100 officers. And that was larger than any northern city police force in the northern part of the entire country. Now, in slavery's defense, there were people who defended it, many of them. Slavery's defense, James Fenimore Cooper, we always pay attention to those authors who use three names, right? James Fenimore Cooper, you had to know what he was talking about. He declared that slavery was essential to our economy and prosperity, and at the same time, a humane institution which provided food, shelter, and family to, I'm quoting, an inferior race. People, and especially those who frequent libraries, seem to give more weight to these people like this. But this was a man of the time, a writer of the time, a famous man of the time, and that's what he thought. I wonder how many people in our audience out there would agree to that. But a historian friend of mine from Maine gave me this writing by Colonel John Reed. He was writing his memoirs. This man was from Georgia, of a wealthy family in Georgia. And this is what he wrote. Men and women of Washington's generation, now we're talking, this is 1880, he wrote this, 1880s. He said, men and women of Washington's generation, so he's speaking from the generation before him, he said, in the South, they regarded slavery as a monstrous evil. But resistless influences wrought a complete change in their descendants. The Negro looked up to and worshiped the white as a god, who he felt it was right that he should serve all the days of his life. And thus the word slavery had lost, he's talking about 1860s now, thus the word slavery had lost all its repulsiveness to the ears of Southerners of my day, 1860s. The slave had become family and he was loved as such. I think maybe these people wouldn't agree with those words from our friend, the soldier. These slaves might be more readily to agree with people who call it the vilest human behavior and institution ever known to man. But this kind of madness wouldn't win favor in Maine, right? It wouldn't win favor in Maine, no. Let's take the case of Austin Willie. Austin Willie was a very well-known preacher from Hollowell, and he was editor of this publication, as you see, called the Advocate of Freedom. So it's a statewide publication. One day he would preach around the state against slavery. One day he was preaching in this hall at Damascotta Bridge, and he called for America to rid itself of the dark evil of slavery, to save the soul of the nation. And this is what he said: it exacerbates relations between North and the South. It arouses passions, leads to lynchings, mob violence, assassination, murder, duels, and slavery, slaveholding regions. And he said, morality is completely corrupted by slavery. The reaction? Mob violence. An enraged mob rushed into this hall. This is Damascotta. Rushed into the hall and scattered the crowd, shouting and swearing at Willie and about abolitionists and an N-word I can't say. The mob charged the platform, badly beat up and battered Reverend Willie and sent him fleeing for his life. And so finally, everything exploded, exploded into the Civil War. This is a picture of Little Roundtree. The most cataclysmic, wrenching time in American history. And it was because of slavery. To put this in perspective of all of our wars, America, and this is American, not fighting other countries, no Japan, no Germany, this is American against American, and it wasn't verbal, it was real guns, real knives, and it cost 625,000 lives. If you add up World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, that's about what we lost, not nearly about what we lost in the Civil War. And why was this? Well, I think the green box will tell us here. These are, besides slavery, tariffs and states' rights were central to the Civil War, okay? But while some of these differences might have been resolved peacefully in negotiations and diplomacy, slavery was not one of those issues. No, slavery was at the core of the Civil War, and for a powerful reason: money. Slavery meant money for sellers, for buyers, and for a lot of others as well. On a typical plantation, get this, typical plantation in those days was like 20 or more slaves. The capital value of the slaves was greater than the capital value of all the land and implements. So if you were a landowner, if you were a plantation owner, you didn't want to lose your slaves. They were worth more than all of the rest of your property. You probably can't see this very well. You look at the dark areas and it gives you an idea where the heaviest number of slaves were. I tell you the truth, there were none in Maine at that time. 100 years earlier, there were 148 down in York County. But this will give you an idea. Okay, we had, in the lower South, there were 2.3 million. There's that's 40% of the population in that region. 7% of the population was slaves. In the upper South, there was 1.2 million. That's 29% of the population in that area. In the border states, there was another 432,586, 13% of the total population. Nearly 1/3 of all Southern families owned slaves. Mississippi and South Carolina would approach a half of all the people owned slaves. So it's very profitable. It's a large profit for a lot of people. And with 30% of the nation's population, the South had 60% of the wealthiest men. Take that. And here is where that money came from. Well, the debate here in Maine goes to these issues I'm about to tell you. The debate here in Maine goes to these issues: cotton, tobacco, and rice. Southern slave laborers harvested all of those. Textile mills. Cotton kept our textile mills running and resulting in products being America's number one export to the world. And all the people it employed. The triangular trade of rum. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, slaves harvested sugarcane. Now that sugarcane was sent to Portland, Maine to be processed into granulated sugar or its liquid form, molasses. More importantly, the sugar kept another industry going, rum. Portland was one of the world's leading refiners of rum and one of the 3 points of the triangle that you see here on this map. Beyond that, there are some other, did I put the name of this? Okay. There are always some ancillary things, but listen to this. This is salted cod. For those of you who haven't guessed salted cod, case in point, I'm making here, is one economist wrote, in many ways, cod was the linchpin of slavery. Write that down, folks. Cod was the linchpin of slavery. Why? Because it was the cheap source of protein to feed plantation slaves. And how were all these goods transported? On ships. Where were these ships made? Many of them were made right here in Maine. So the majority, many people say that not a minority, but a majority of Mainers supported what they call healthy slavery. We want healthy slaves. We don't want to have them in horrible conditions, but slaves, we need them. That was certainly the case up through the 1800s to 1860. Through this entire period, from the early to mid-1800s, the anti-slavery movement existed and then it was up and down, back and forth. And on the early to mid-1800s, anti-slavery societies did not generally receive broad support. The abolitionist anti-slavery movement that had grown in the late 1700s had caught fire in 1820s, had gone kaput, slumbering until the 1840s. And for a brief time, it was revived by the likes of Frederick Douglass and General Samuel Fessenden of Portland, and Reverend Willie, that we showed earlier. So it's true that slavery was not always what the Union soldiers fought against, but rather it was put down to Southern rebellion. They call it a Southern rebellion. Not only people across the nation, but right here in Maine, in our community, fought for these reasons. Here we go. The Maine Democrat newspaper is a Democrat newspaper, obviously published in Saco, and were adamantly pro-slavery. And they published scathing articles about abolitionists like Willie and Fessenden, who they called them Black Republicans. They even called the Union, not the Southern Confederates, they called the Union, the Northern, called them revolutionaries. The paper's stance was based on the states' rights, which it deemed essential to Republican freedom and good government. Whenever the Union becomes destructive of these rights, it departs from its legitimate purpose. And on the other side, can you see this? Okay, on the other side, we have male anti-slavery societies, male, okay? We women can't come to these. Actually, they did allow women to these. But we have male anti-slavery societies where Monmouth, Winthrop, Kennebec County, Augusta, Gardner, Litchfield, Turner, Bowdenham, there were a lot of them. And we had female anti-slavery societies because we didn't want to leave the ladies out. And they met in grand places like North Wayne, West Gardner, Mountain Vernon. I'm honest to goodness, it's true. So along comes, it was, I'm gonna say, so catastrophic was slavery and the fight to free slaves that 155 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed America's slaves, it's still in the news. Just 3 years ago, the Brunswick home, there we go. The Brunswick home of Harriet Beecher Stowe and her husband Calvin was made a National Historic Landmark, 155 years after the fact. So it's been on the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom for a while, but they just named this to their network, to the historic landmark. Not that long ago either, about a year ago. Oh, I have last February 23rd, that would be a year ago. People held a pro-Confederate rally at the Old Miss to protest against removing Confederate monuments. 100 people showed up to join the rally. 50 protested against it, but it's like they're in the news. And we're looking forward to, anybody know who this is? Everybody knows this lady, right?
Harriet Tubman.
It's amazing how many people know this lady's name. Harriet Tubman. So in 2016, good 6 years ago, the US Treasury announced that Harriet Tubman, a heroine of the Underground Railroad, oh man, she was an amazing woman. She was a slave herself, escaped, went back, kept bringing slaves to freedom. But she's going to replace former president and slave owner Andrew Jackson, the guy with the great hair, on the $20 bill. The final concept design was scheduled to be unveiled 4 years later. That would have made it 2020. So we're now 2022. I guess they moved the date up to 2026 before we'll get to Harriet Tubman's. But when it comes out, it may look something like this. That's one of my favorite slides in this presentation. Harriet Tubman, kick out that Jackson guy. So our country is catching up to our history. And we're going to get right now to what happened here in Maine. I want to do a little self-promotion, show you my book cover. That's available at various places. And for me too, if you want to send me a note. I'll always sign one of those and give them to you. So this is about risking lives and fortunes. Maine's Underground Railroad. And some right here, as I mentioned, in Monmouth, who fought against the institution and fought to free slaves. Because Maine was indeed the home to both Abraham Lincoln's vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, the gentleman on the left, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, handsome lady on the right. It was also the final stop for many slaves who were heading up to Freedom Land. That would be Canada. Freedom Land is Canada. A US senator and former Maine governor, Mr. Hamlin, he was from Paris, by the way, was very staunch in his anti-slavery rhetoric. Hamlin said, and I quote, "When our Constitution was formed, nobody doubted, everybody expected that the institution of slavery, so lethal in its effects, would fade away. But times have changed. The invention of the cotton gin made the production of cotton profitable, and with that power of public sentiment has changed in the South, and too much here in the North. Slavery might help the South temporarily, but permanently, it's a blight. Shall we repeal freedom and make slavery? It comes to that." And in fact, Abraham Lincoln chose Hamlin as his vice president running mate, largely because Hamlin's increasingly anti-slavery views caused him to leave the Democratic Party and join the newly formed Republican Party in 1856. That's caused a national sensation in itself. So Lincoln thought that Mr. Hamlin, a former Democrat, could work to convict other Democrats to leave the party and join the Republicans. And now I want to unshare. Can I unshare?
Yep.
I want to unshare.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
See on the left screen, up at the top, remember there's that little red.
Okay.
button that you say?
I don't see it up there. Oop. Oh, I guess maybe I can't.
How do you get your mouse over there?
I don't know. It's not moving over there. It's been moving all along. Oh, well, I wanted to share with you, there was a poster that they made, and if you write up the name, there we go, Abraham Lincoln. Hamlin is in the middle of Abraham Lincoln's name. They actually made a poster like that, and I'll bet you, except for people who've seen this talk before, you've never heard of this before.
No.
There you go. There's something to take home to the grandkids. Maybe not. Abraham Lincoln. Oh, it was there. I made a post. I even forgot I made that thing. There you go. Abraham Lincoln. Now, there we go. When Lincoln and Hamlin were elected, they received 60% of Maine's 100,000 votes. In 1864, Hamlin was replaced by another Southern Democrat, that Jackson guy, to present a Union face to the voters. But the Mainers who stood with Lincoln and Hamlin helped the slave escape over Albany Underground Railroad. And they put themselves, their lives, and their fortunes in jeopardy. In jeopardy because if they were caught, they faced heavy fines and or imprisonment. Really, honest. The first Fugitive Slave Act, enacted in 1793, was reinforced in 1850, and it made helping fugitive slaves a penal offense. Now, this measure laid up to $1,000, we're talking about 1850 bucks, $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail per slave if you're caught harboring them, helping them prevent arrest, helping them escape. In one trial, 3 people were convicted in Michigan, cost them $6,000, and a guy in Pennsylvania was fined $4,000. A man in Baltimore was sentenced to 45 years. Praise God, the North won the war, and he was given out of prison. But he was sentenced to 45 years for helping a family of 9 escape. 45 years. You can kill people and get less than that. Moreover, all the officers of the law were required to help owners take their slaves back. Our northern police forces, sheriffs, had to take the slaves back if they were asked to, and any citizen could be compelled under the law to help capture fugitives. Now, think of it this way. Okay, we're right here in Monmouth. Say we're in the north, because if you look, you can see that, okay, all across the border there, see how the northern and the southern states were divided? Picture yourself as on that border. Picture yourself as on that Mason-Dixon line. So here in Monmouth, we're in the north. Wales, right down the street, Wales is in the south. We're all friends, we're all neighbors, we went to school together, we work together, we worship together, you know, we're together, we're connected. But in Monmouth, in the north, above that line, slavery is outlawed. Wales, below that line, slavery is part of the fabric of society, its business and its economy. And yet, in many instances, our northern economy is intertwined with the South. In many places, half the northern population supports the South use of slaves. Now, here's the situation in 1850. The abolitionist anti-slavery movement that had begun in the 1700s caught fire and then died, was in that slumber until along came our favorite lady from Maine, Harriet Beecher Stowe. She came up here. Calvin had an assignment in Bowdoin College to teach there as a professor. And while they were living in Brunswick, 1850 to 1852, Mrs. Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, originally subtitled The Man That Was a Thing. It was subtitled The Man That Was a Thing. And it became a national sensation. It was serialized in this weekly magazine called the National Era. So it ran in this magazine from April 51 to June 52. And then it became a book that was published as a novel, quickly selling and unprecedented for that time, 300,000 copies in 1 year. It revitalized anti-slavery feelings around the country. It was printed in other language. It was a sensation. Now, on November 25, 1862, when Mrs. Stowe met President Lincoln, as the legend goes, President Lincoln said, "So you're the little lady who wrote the book that started this great war." Years later, Ohio Senator B.F. Wade called Uncle Tom's Cabin a 100-pound bomb inspired by God, fired at the damnable curse of slavery, and the explosion would be heard around the world. It was indeed. It ignited what was truly a time of whites and blacks working together for a common cause, with Christian churches heavily involved. Pastors in many churches supported slavery, some of them didn't. But they're at the heart of the anti-slavery movement. Christian zeal, Christian faith, the desire to help the runaway slaves. Presbyterians, Baptists, Christian colleges like Oberlin, everywhere. But especially in this weather we've been having, and may have this weekend, it makes me think it wasn't a lot of fun for these escaping slaves, no matter what the season was, especially in the winter. It had to be a rugged, challenging race to get out of the country. I haven't mentioned that there were, in my book in particular, this comes out, there are slave hunters. If you were to catch a slave and get him back to his plantation, remember how important they were to the plantations? There was a bounty on slaves. You bring them back, you get paid, and it was a big deal. And escaping those guys was a big deal. Obviously, it became more difficult in the winter, but hey. Now, this was from the Freedom Network that shows the map of where slaves went around the country. And you can see I was kind of interested the people that headed south. So they ended up down in Mexico or the Caribbean, right? One thing that is missing, oh, I get it. So the creation of the Underground Railroad is kind of cool in the terms. Houses and businesses where fugitives would rest and eat were called stations and depots. And they were run by station masters who contributed money or goods or stockholders. And people who were responsible for moving them from one place to the next were called conductors. And believe it or not, oftentimes those conductors were kids, children. There was a boy that was 10 years old that helped dozens of slaves escape, Mordecai Bennett from Ohio. But one thing that is missing, you'll notice something missing here. Look up at Maine. They don't have us. Well, let's educate the uneducated people of making silly maps that don't include Maine underground, because we were very, very involved. Matter of fact, we got like close to 90 towns across the state that had at least one, if not more, houses that helped the slaves escape. So I always thought, one of my presentations, I have a map, oh yeah, we didn't have maps back then. How do the slaves know where to go? Well, the people who were helping only knew little. They knew who was giving them the slaves and who they're supposed to take the slaves to. Other than that, they knew very little. But we found out over time that the slaves, once they came into Portland, they'd go up the coast or they'd go inland. And when they went inland, a lot of them went what was the Boston Post Road. That Boston Post Road took them to places like Auburn, Monmouth, Augusta, Gardner, across to China and Vassalboro, and up to Bangor. And you'll notice, I think, can we hear? Yeah, this is if you had a map back then. You didn't though, did you? These are some of the towns that we have so far. We have 89 of them that we know for sure had safe houses. And we keep adding to that list, but there they are. Now, this is unassuming building, right? This little house is very unassuming, but I love it because it proves a point beyond argument. Lenny and Danielle Goodine bought this house in Palermo in the spring of 2017, which is, I think, when they brought their pictures to me, not long after that. They made this amazing discovery from the Civil War era that she shared with my wife and me. Their home was built in the 1850s, and they discovered what could be a drawer up in the second floor, and when lifted and pulled out, it revealed a secret room. In that secret room was a letter. And let me read you the letter. It was written by Charles, who was a soldier in the Civil War, and he was writing to his wife. And he said, "Dearest Sarah, I've missed you so much as the fighting has been very heavy for the past few days. God, however, has been my stay, and without his help and the thought of you, my love, I would have given up long ago. Many men in my camp have nearly given up hope and of seeing their families again. There are times, my love, that the verse comes to mind. Behold, I have graven thee on the palms of my hand. Thy walls are continually before me. God has done many things for me these past months, things I could not even imagine. But listen to this. Listen to this. So Charles writes, the farm is being well taken care of by your guests, I trust. Just make sure they're not seen. Pretty soon, you should send them on their way to Canada. Congress has enacted a new law. Yeah, 1860, they reconfirmed the 1850, which reconfirmed the 17th. So they reconfirmed the bill in 1860. He says, Congress has enacted a new law. Billed as a fugitive slave law, and slave owners from the southern states can come to the north and recapture their slaves. Those harboring these fugitives can be arrested for doing so. Be careful. Your loving Charles. Which raises the question, how did slaves know where to go? How to connect to the Underground Railroad in the first place? It was, we didn't have social media back then. No one could text. Thank goodness. Okay, I shouldn't say. To a great degree, it was a seat of the pants operation, but generally slaves knew that they could get across the Ohio River, like my guy Tice, they could get across the Ohio River. They could somehow find their way. As for signs, if you look to the house on the left, that's my nephew's house in Cumberland Forsyth, you see the white chimney with the black top. That was a sign. Later it became a sign for something else, but that was a sign that this was a slave house, a slave safe house, and you could hide there. The hitching post jockey, I think everybody's probably trashed them. They could have made some money because the hitching post jockey was a good thing. He might be black. He was a good thing. That meant that was a safe house. Wherever that hitching post jockey was, that was a safe house. It wasn't a racist symbol. And there are other things like grabbing your left ear when passing a black man meant follow me. Trees along the way were marked with a peg leg and a foot on directing the way. And of course, there was the slave grapevine, and that was their first version probably of social media. Yeah, TikTok and all those crazy things. And then there was and I met some ladies who are big into quilts, and this is people in the quilt world. If you're out there in your quilt world, you probably know all about this. These are quilts, and I only have 8 of them here, but a lady in Camden, I think it was, showed me like another dozen of, and these were, they made these, women would make their quilts, they put them out on their porches, hang them in their porches, and certain symbols meant different things. The monkey wrench in the top left meant get ready, gather the tools you'll need to build shelters, navigate the journey, or defend yourself along the way. And then the flying geese, bottom left was flying geese, follow the migrating geese north to Canada. And they all had different symbols for the slaves and tell them how to get to safety. I mean, these were, and actually there were real above ground railroads too there that they used, Tice used there. Give you an idea, Portland was a hub. Portland was a hub in more ways than one. Portland was a hub for slaves. And this is a painting. You think of Portland now, don't think of Portland. Don't think of Portland today. Think of this picture of Portland. This is 1860. The Prince of Wales came for a visit. And if you look close, you can see the boat that's leaving. That's Prince of Wales leaving. But that gives you an idea. That was Portland. Now, it was a big hub, it was a big port, and therefore a lot of slave hunters came to Portland figuring they could capture the slaves there in that city. And boy, did they have trouble because the people in Portland were really well coordinated. Met a lady a year or so ago whose ancestor ran one of the used clothing places. Slave would show up in Portland and they would see, they were taken to a barber. The barber would change their appearance. Not only would they cut their hair, they would use wigs, fake beards, and other facial coverings to disguise the slave. Then they were taken to a secondhand clothing store and they were dressed in finer clothing. Reuben Ruby, who was a well-known black man that owned one of the hack stands. He would take them in a hidden compartment in the back of his hack, and take them from one place to the other, one place to the other. They would get their hair done, they'd get clothed, they'd be hidden, and then people wouldn't recognize that they were slaves because they were just completely different, made over. Look at Hollywood nowadays, but they could do it back then. That's maybe where Hollywood got their ideas, to put fake beards on people. But that's what they did in Portland. It was just amazing. Reuben Ruby down there, you see Pakistan there, he had, and they were taken to various houses there in Portland. I guess I didn't leave any of those slides in. So they were taken inland or up the ocean, up the Atlantic Ocean, to different rivers in Maine. They were taken inland to places like, no, you got the Quaker? Okay, you got the Quaker. I was like, I'm out of whack here. What I like about the Quaker, this is the Quaker Meeting House in Durham, on the road between Lisbon Falls and Freeport. You pass it on that street, on that road there. What is great about the Quakers is this: they couldn't tell a lie. They just couldn't lie. It was part of their religion. So what would they do if they were hiding slaves? And they did. They were really involved in the safe houses. What would they do if a sheriff showed up and says, "I hear you hiding slaves"? Well, they would say no, and they weren't lying, because they did not accept that slavery was a valid institution. It didn't exist. So hey, we don't have any slaves in this house. Okay, then they would make, you would see, you have to look hard when you're looking for this house. It's right on the line between Lewiston and Lisbon Falls on 196, 197. And then we get into Maine. Hugh, are you with us? I don't know if Hugh's
Was there earlier.
is Hugh with us?
Needs to unmute.
Waiting for Hugh Lemaster to.
I'm here. Greetings from
There
home
you go.
station.
Okay, Hugh. Now people that don't know Hugh, he lives up in North Main Street, just before you get to 202, on top of the hill there. Tell us about your home, will you, Hugh?
Well, I was saying greetings from home station on the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, awesome.
That, I believe my second great grandfather, Samuel Holmes, would have been the conductor, and then it would have been Ben Ellis, who would have been a step great grandfather, because my great grandfather's wife died, and then Ben married him. But during that time, and I'm not sure how far back, we lived next to High Street. A lot of people, of course, maybe don't know that, but the Academy Road was always originally known, its first name was High Street. And the main street that goes by our home here was nothing more than a 2-track for wagons to go from farm to farm. It really wasn't much of a road. The main drag was what you think of or know as Academy Road, but previously in the Monmouth history was known as High Street in its early days. So if you came up from High Street or down from High Street, you'd have been heading north towards Winthrop on from the old Lewiston Road, as we call it nowadays, and you'd stop by, and usually they were delivered at night, hiding in kegs in a wagon under hay piles in the back of a wagon, and then escorted into the house and kept away from the windows. And there's a secret room upstairs. You could open a closet, lift up the floor, and 4 to 6 souls could leap down into this space, and the floor would cover them in case anybody came to investigate. So my father discovered that. He was a history teacher at Bates College back in the 40s and early 50s, and he was having some major renovations done in the home, and because one of his students and others, you've probably all heard of Robert Kennedy, he ran for president. He stayed here, and other students and family members and faculty on weekends. That was my father's hobby, was running a kind of a hobby bed and breakfast. So he made more accommodations to make things better. And one thing was to put in a laboratory with a mirror and all for the ladies to freshen up right by the dining room. And he used to have these lavish entertainments, and they talk civics, political, current events, and all that sort of thing. So while he was entertaining these people, he tried to make these improvements. Well, one day he was here in the office that I'm talking to you now, when the contractors came in. Again, this was around just prior to 50 or I guess in the early 50s. and said to him, Professor Lemaster, you need to come downstairs and look and see what we've discovered. Because when they pulled the wall apart to put in plumbing and create the laboratory for the ladies, they found this space. And then they further investigated and found that the floor lifted up in the closet above it. And my father, being, a history teacher and so forth, quickly put two and two together and figured it all out. And so that's how we discovered that we were a
This
station
is
on
just-
the Underground Railroad. So,
Thank you, Hugh. That's just a great story. Go into a closet, pull up the floor, and there's room for 4 to 6 people in there.
yes,
Then we have the, thanks again, Hugh.
you're welcome.
Then we have the Raymond House, which is up on the Norris Hill Road, about 2/3 of the way up the hill on Norris Hill Road. Another unassuming house, but within it is, if you walk in the front door, there's a closet. You walk, which is right there on the left, and you walk inside. Well, we had to move the clothing out of the way, but there's a fake door in the back of that closet. And if you go inside there, and I was in there taking pictures badly, there was room for, I don't know, 8 or 10 people in there, but they're well hidden behind everything. Now that was the Raymond House on Norris Hill Road. Then we have the Captain White home on Academy Road. Holly Dumain's old house, people might remember Holly, the former librarian, and that's about a half mile north of the high school, I think. Amanda, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, tell us about your place there at your house, Amanda. This is Amanda Bacam.
Yeah, our house is from 1790, and we found through probably Hugh telling us about it, because I don't know where else we could have found it. The upstairs in our guest room in the back is also a closet, like what Hugh was talking, or what the house before this was, with you pull out the shelves, and then in the back is a wall that has an empty space behind it. So, oh yes, that's that. So we haven't gotten totally in yet, but we're interested in doing that.
Pretty nifty. Thank you, Amanda. Get the chainsaw going.
I know, I kind of want to. I'm looking forward. I want to find a letter from the Civil War.
There
let
you go. I hope you do. I hope you do. Don't cause too much havoc, though.
Okay, I'll try.
And then we have, this is amazing. We have 4 houses in this little village of Monmouth, Maine. The Earl Flanders' old home. It's now the funeral. Well, I guess it has long been next to the funeral home there. And is Ray Graham with us? Are you here, Ray? Ray tells a story. You people know Ray. He works as a historian and loves history. And when he was growing up, he tells a story. He was growing up across the street from the Flanders home. And there was a barn there at the time attached to the funeral home. Actually, Hugh might be able to fill me in here, but attached to that funeral home was a second floor trap door that led to a space behind a false wall and where the stable would be in the barn. There was a false wall there. And according to Ray, I think they said they also had, they had a false floor in this barn. Because the kids would play hide and seek, and who's going to find me? I'm behind the false floor or the false wall. And so that was kind of, who's going to have a false floor unless they're hiding slaves? I don't know any farmers that have done that. But that's the case with the Earl Flanders home. So we have those four places. Now, I've got a, I guess we're getting short in time here, but I did want to have a couple places to tell you about. This is one of my favorite stories of all. It's the Farwell Mansion in Augusta. If you drive north of Augusta on the other side of the river, heading towards Vassalboro, right at the top, a mile north of the Vassalboro town line on Riverside Drive, is this beautiful home, always well kept, on the right-hand side of the road, on the east side of the road. And it was built by Captain Ebenezer Farwell in 1842. But he and his family never got to live there. Farwell was a slave trader. He was a slave trader. And he was killed on a voyage to Africa to pick up some slaves. And his widow sold the property to Israel Weeks. what did Israel Weeks do? He used it as a safe house for escaping slaves. And his great-great-granddaughter, Isabel Weeks, tells the story, and it's just a great story. Oh, and also, this kind of leads into my little story about Brunswick and Topsham. That is on the right-hand side of that road. The river is probably, what, a quarter, an eighth of a mile away. The river's a good distance away. They dug a tunnel underneath the road all the way to the river, and the slaves would escape up the Kennebec River.
You did have a question on the chat about if there were any stations in Litchfield. Do you know of any in Litchfield?
I don't know of any in Litchfield. I don't know of any in Litchfield. I'll go through these quickly because because of the time constraints here. But this is the Fiscal House in Gardner. This is the Lamb House, which is right by on the Gardner side of the bridge, going over to Randolph. This is the Nascent House, which is in my book. And the Nascent House is cool because in one of their rooms, there was a huge bookcase. And the bookcase swung out. So there was a room behind it for 2 slaves. And if they were in danger, there was a little hole in the floor that they could go down into the basement and escape back into the woods. There were woods back then. Then that was the Frank and Mildred Nason house, and so that was important to my book story. One of the most fascinating stories of all is the stories of Brunswick and Topsham, and of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe lived on the south side of this map here. If you can see Federal Street, it runs parallel to Main Street, and there are a lot of rich people in Brunswick at that time. A lot of rich people who are anti-slave. They're abolitionists, and they wanted to help the slaves. And they sold this story to their fellow residents of Bowdoin. We need a drainage system built here, and so we will pay for it. Don't have to use taxpayers' dollars. We, the people who live here, will pay for this tunnel to be built, this drainage ditch to be built. Well, it just so happens that St. Peter and Paul Church in Lewiston, they finished the job up there, all these Italian bricklayers, and they needed to work. They would bring them in at night, and they would build this tunnel. The tunnel wasn't like one of these things you'd see in The Great Escape. This tunnel, people could walk side by side, standing upright, walking it's about a mile from the river all the way to Bowdoin College. And there were 3 houses in Bowdoin College that had slaves. And then you had Harriet Beecher Stowe and other houses along the way and they would take these slaves across the river to Topsham. Love this. And in Topsham, okay, so down where the number 24s are there, that's where they coming in, they take them across the river to the grist mill. And in the grist mill, there are, a matter of fact, I talked to people whose family owned this grist mill. They had tunnels from the grist mill up across the road, up across Main Street to Elm Street. And they would go, right, I'll tell you, if you see the Elm Street there, you go like close to a half a mile down Elm Street, and you have all these houses that are connected to it. Charles Thompson and Walker Homestead. These houses were all connected by tunnel to the Underground Railroad. Everything but the Baptist Church didn't have a tunnel. They just brought them there. Okay, so the people that were going up the coast would go to places like, there are 2 houses in Wiscasset. This is the Castle Tucker, which if you are going into Wiscasset and you're at the top of the hill before you go down into the business area, hang a quick right, it'll take you to not only Castle Tucker, but this home here. I spoke to this lady whose son actually was best friends with a kid who lived in this house, and he took him on a tour of this house. And you see up at the very top there, you go up to that staircase, there is make sure I get the story correct here. Right. Okay. So this house was built in 1804 by a shipping magnate, and the 3rd floor safe house room was hidden behind a bookcase. So they had a bookcase on hinges. You would open it up, and there was a safe room there. And if you had to get out, there was a spiral staircase. And this this boy, I got the story from his mother. He went down the spiral staircase and descended all the way to the basement. And there was a tunnel. The tunnel's blocked off now, but this tunnel apparently went all the way to back down the street, which is 100 yards maybe down the street to Castle Tucker. And
I have a question.
okay.
You're talking about these tunnels.
Yes.
Are they still there?
Okay. Did I go by? Okay, there's a story. I had a story. One guy was telling me somewhere in my talk here, just skipping by so much, that he said when they were kids, they used to play in that, you know where the fairground is? They used to play just in the south end of the fairground.
In Thompson?
In Topsom.
Yeah.
And okay, here we go. Elv Leach said the United Baptist Church bought the Walker House, tore it down, parking lot when she was a schoolgirl in the 1950s. Before they tore it down, she went inside and saw two tunnels in the basement, one heading along Elm Street and another up the hill to that first house on Main Street. And the tunnels were falling in. Another gentleman was telling me he used to play up to the fairgrounds, and there was a tunnel they could get into partway into the tunnel from the fairgrounds. And he said that's now collapsed, but they were there.
It was my husband.
My idea is Brunswick ought to just spend a lot of money, have it rebuilt, and sell tickets to people who can go down the old Underground Railroad. Wouldn't that be that would be a prize. That would be a lot of fun. But I haven't heard that they're going to do that yet. But a lot of these places, the cellars, Amy, the arches remain, but we can see where the arches were and where the tunnels were, but they're bricked up at this point over the years. So if you're going up the coast further, and this is kind of a personal story to me because this is in Robbinston, and I'm part Indian, Passamaquoddy Indian, and the Indians helped. They had homes there in Robbinston. And the Indians, according to Donald Sakdama, who is still alive and with us, he's a tribal historic preservation officer. And he said this: there was a Passamaquoddy settlement in Robbinston, and escaped slaves would show up there, and they were helped. And the main place that I heard of was St. Andrews, New Brunswick, but there may have been other places because we have relatives in the Tobique region. So that house, and I always picture that, that's my ancestors' house right there, because they must have been helping the slaves. I don't know. But there was another house there, which is now the Brewer House B&B. And they were taken up the river to Bangor, the old Bangor Brewer. This house was there when I was living in Brewer, but it's not there anymore. It's now a park called Freedom Park, oddly enough, called Freedom Park, and they have it's dedicated to Joshua Chamberlain and to the slaves. Now, in this house, from where we're looking, the Penobscot River is to the left, down a steep embankment to the river, and it's called the Holyoke House. The Holyoke House was like the last stop before you hit the willywags, before you hit the real forest to get up to Canada. And John Holyoke lived there, and there at the back of that house, there was a tunnel. There was a summer kitchen, a pantry, and had a tunnel that went all the way down the hill to, there was what he called Freedom. He had a place down there called Freedom. The Indians from the Penobscot and sometimes the Passamaquoddy Indians would take them from Brewer, Maine, from Brewer. Okay, on the left, the bottom left, that shows a picture of the tunnel before they tore the house down. There's my slave right there. I thought of Tice, the picture of Tice all the time. I was writing the book and I saw the statue and I said, oh my gosh, that is Tice. It's exactly like him. Okay, so see where Bangor is in this map. Imagine, just try to imagine taking slaves on a canoe and paddling up the Penobscot River. You get to Mattawamkeag, and where the Penobscot goes off to the east branch, and you hang a right in the Mattawamkeag River, which is a river but not as huge, and paddling all the way to Fort Fairfield. Paddling all the way to Fort Fairfield from Brewer. I mean, it takes a couple hours. It takes hours to drive that. but it's just the tenacity, the strength, the bravery of this whole trip is amazing. And it ends there in Fort Fairfield. It would be one of two places. This church, which has started holding annual Underground Railroad memorial meetings. I've been invited to go up there and will as soon as things straighten out. They would end up at two places, the Maple Groves Friends House, right just shown here, and the James Fitzherbert Tavern, which is about a mile, a kilometer, it's a 6/10 of a mile from where the US-Canadian border office is. Now in the tavern, slaves were hidden in a secret room behind a rollaway door that looked like a wall, and they shuttled via the Sam Everett Road to the Tomlinson Lake. It was a logging road that ran parallel to Tomlinson Lake Brook. And they would continue on foot following the brook until they reached the lake, and they were in freedom at that point in time. They were in New Brunswick, and that was free. It was Canada. There was no slavery in Canada. The route met the same path along the way that the Friends Church were using to go across Monson Pond. Now at the Tomlinson Lake, the Tomlinson family gave them accommodations before they joined other refugee communities in Upper Kent and other places along the St. John River and Fredericton and Carleton County in New Brunswick. And that was their story, and it was not a lot of fun, but it had a rewarding ending if they made it all the way to Canada Freedom Land. And that's where my story ends, except for, hey, today's scourge, slavery, human trafficking. So the human condition continues, only in different ways today.
I have some things that were here in the
Yes.
chat.
Yes.
First off, we had Deborah Norris said that the Norris Farm on Norris Hill Road in Monmouth has a hidden room believed by the current owners to have been used in the Underground Railroad. Do you know anything about that?
If it's not the one that I showed on the Norris Hill Road, I showed that house on the Norris Hill Road, right?
Yeah, was that the one, Deborah, that you were talking about? The one that he showed the picture of? No, she says no.
No, it's a different one. Well, I got to find out more. Please have her
Yeah, absolutely.
email me.
Yeah, email Mark.
gripfast@roadrunner.com.
It's gripfast. Here, I'm going to put it in the gripfast@roadrunner.com. So someone else asked, and it's actually Dale from the Underground Railroad, Kennebec, Dale Potter Clark from the Underground Railroad, Kennebec County. Can you tell us anything about Reverend David Thurston of Winthrop?
Do not have any information on David Thurston. Sorry.
I've heard that name too, so I'm not sure.
He could have been one of those people that were out there preaching abolition to get rid of the slave trade,
Yeah.
and they could have been badly treated. He was taking his life into his hand because they weren't real friendly back then. I didn't include anybody that caught my Ku Klux Klan talk. You could see they actually tarred and feathered people back then. Here in Maine, elsewhere, they tarred and feathered Father John Baptist. And that we don't have any cases of murdering or lynchings here in Maine. That's a good thing, huh? But still, it was kind of dangerous because, you couldn't put in the newspaper, hey, I'm going to hide slaves, you can send them my way. I mean, because you were breaking the law, you couldn't do that. And so this is a big, huge word of mouth movement. And if you think back on it, say, if we couldn't have our telephones like today, how would we form a network that was this sophisticated to help this many people get to freedom? It's just for thousands of miles along the way. It was extraordinary people taking extraordinary risks. So it wasn't just the slaves putting their lives on the line. It was a lot of people.
Now, Harry Grimnitz, he's the person who asked about the Litchfield, and Marty Sulis says, about the Litchfield station, said that we lived in a home in Litchfield on Stevenstown Road, built in 1790, that had a hidden space behind the fireplace and under the staircase. Always wondered about the Underground Railroad using that space. And I know I live in a really old home myself, and we often hear about these little spaces, right? That you can find these little nooks and crannies. Mm-hmm. Is there any way, or how do you determine if in fact that might have been used? Or is it just a case that many houses had those nooks and crannies and they weren't necessarily used?
That's really really hard to say. I know we have had, as a matter of fact, I had to take a house that was in Waterville off my list because we found out there was actually the tunnel that went from this house, which is near the Baptist church in downtown Waterville. It went down to the river. They found out that was actually a bootlegging
That's what I was
operation.
gonna say.
And so I said,
find
oh, that
different
wasn't
things.
the slaves. They were bootlegging themselves, all right. But so every once in a while you say, well, were they for our slaves or were they for to protect yourself from the Indians, for instance? Because I know my wife's family was mostly wiped out by an Indian attack down in Scarborough, and so there was people had different ways to protect themselves from Indians. But would you hide your St. Hughes house in a room where the Indians were big on burning down houses? I don't think I want to be in a burning down house and not be able to escape. So I think the tunnels were the way to go. In particular, but in the house on North Hill Road that we did have, that was surrounded by brick. Brick was all around it. It had fireplaces on both sides of the wall, and so you were kind of protected. If they tried to burn that down, I think you'd live. But yeah, it's maybe the contract, the house builders back there had spaces where they shouldn't have had spaces. But if you have, I know Nancy Pratt, people here might know Nancy. She called me the other day, and when she was a little girl growing up in Cumberland, one of her friends on oh goodness, I know the name of the street because I have a cousin that lives there. And just outside the town of Cumberland, there was a fake wall. I mean, there was a wall that could move. She said somehow they just moved this wall and there's a room behind it. Well, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Unless it was to hide slaves. And so
There's a couple people here from Winthrop that are saying like 98 Main Street in Winthrop has a sub-basement entering through a trap door in the kitchen. Makes one wonder.
Yeah.
That could be a root cellar. Yeah, again, like as you're saying, it's not necessarily one way or another. But Dale Potter Clark also said that Winthrop did have a strong underground railroad network, inspired and led by that Reverend Thurston.
Oh, I want to have him get in touch with me then.
Yeah.
Please get in touch with me.
Yes, Dale, and I know I'm part of that Facebook group that Dale has. So I know it's very interesting site. A lot of great information there. But also several state houses. Metcalf Hill was once known as N-word Hill because it was
yeah, I've heard that story.
The Underground Railroad. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that story. I'm trying to find the list of Maine. There we go. Winthrop is in there, so we know there was a safe house. Where it is located, I'm not certain, but I would love to hear from them and find out more about it.
Somebody also did ask, the question. I know you and I had talked about this before about the Underground Railroad quilts. Are they fact or fiction? Because I've heard, is it folklore? Is it actual kind of? What is your take on that?
I know it's for real because I forget where it was. I spoke to one group, and there must have been a dozen women there who were quilters, and they all knew the story. And one of them brought up to me a miniature. It was like the size of like 2 feet by 2 feet, and she had somehow made miniatures of all of these different. So it was really a quilted quilt within a quilt. And so I know there were a lot. I know from these people really got into it, really got involved.
And it is a great way to symbol, a great symbol as a flag.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Okay, anybody out there? You'd have to take your unmute off so we can hear you. But any questions anybody has, please chime in. You have to hit your unmute button, and then.
Hey, Mark.
Yes,
Mark. I'm still not familiar. I used to manage the funeral home down here in Monmouth 7 years ago, and I'm not familiar with that space. And being close to Mr. Flanders, I don't remember that story. You might want to ask Mary if she remembers. But putting 2 and 2 together, there may be some validity to that because that property should be known as the Gilman Livery Stable. That's its That's its main claim to fame. All the properties on the shore down behind there in Cottanawagan originated from that farm and were broken up into cottages. There was a barn that used to be there that people probably remember was even longer in the far long days gone. It stored or held 100 horses there, and you could lease wagons and sulkies to get to get about town if you didn't own them yourself. So that would make sense that there was so much traffic going in and out of there that might support something to do with the Underground Railroad. But I would talk to Mary; she might know more. Mary Turner, Mary Flanders.
Okay. Yeah, Ray told me that. I was hoping he'd join us tonight to share that story with him. Ray Graham. And,
I'd be very interested since I spent a lot of time in that building in years past.
yeah, right, for sure. Well, if there aren't any other questions,
I have a question. Can
Okay.
you hear me? Yeah, I'm looking, you're now showing your possible Maine safe house sites, the Maine
Yes.
map, but it's cut off at the bottom. I can't see anything past Parsons Field.
It cut down at Parsons Field, really? Oh my gosh, you're missing a lot of them. Is there
Well,
any
it
way
goes
that I
here,
can
it goes-
raise
this
that up,
is-
Amy?
No, I don't think so. Here. Let me just show you what it's like.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're missing
Yeah, it's like down
probably
Hamsfield.
5, 10, 15, 20,
Yeah.
20 some odd towns, including, I'll list some of them up, okay? You're missing Lebanon, Lee, Lewiston, Lovell, Machias, Maple Grove, Newfield, Newport, Norridgewock, North Yarmouth, Oakfield, Orland, Orono, Porter, Portland, Robbinston, Rockland, Saco, Salem, Sanford, Springville, which is a cool story, which I could have shared. Waterville, Wells, Westbrook, Wilton, Wyndham, Winterport, Wiscasset, and Winthrop. Hopefully I said that slow enough for everybody to hear them all, but commit them to memory. Did you commit them to memory, Dale?
No, but
Oh.
as you're talking, I'm just looking here and I see Farmington and Jay on here. And I don't know how they got from Augusta or Winthrop to Farmington and Jay without going through Reedfield.
Well, yeah, well, probably they did. I just haven't heard. We were up in Skowhegan one day, and a lady from Chesterville, and I said, "Where's Chesterville?" No, I'm sorry, it was Cornville. I said, "Where's Cornville?" And it was like 20 miles northeast of Skowhegan, and she had proof that her house was a safe house. Yeah, she had paperwork about letters and things about it. It was,
Wow,
Hey, Mark,
that's great.
Mark, I might have an answer to that road. The travel route she mentioned, you don't need to go through Reedfield back in the day to get to Farmington. There was a road established, a commerce road between Wales and Farmington in 1821, and it went through Leeds. It went through down through by Beaverbrook to Leeds and right up through to Jay, Livermore, Farmington.
Uh-huh.
okay.
That commerce route is now closed off because the road dead ends down by Beaverbrook, but you didn't need to go through Reedfield. You could leave North Monmouth, go right down through the Leeds and right up through Livermore Falls and Jay and on to Farmington. That road, that's been documented as a commerce route. It actually went down along the end of Cottanawagan when Cottanawagan was low enough to have a road at the end of it. Now it's underwater. That came up to the packing shed up on Norris Hill Road, right by one of the underground station spots.
Yeah.
So,
I tell you, I think we appreciate the chore it was for them to travel. I was speaking up to the Jesse Lee Church up in Reedfield, and Francis Asbury had traveled from Monmouth to Reedfield to Jesse Lee Church. Now it's about a 20-minute drive there, 15 to 20-minute drive up to that church in cars today. He said it was like going through Dismal Swamp. Took him forever to get there, and we don't realize that. And that was 1810 probably in that vicinity, and we don't realize how hard it was to get from one place to another. A lot of walking.
Could I just quickly mention too, that I've had people from Fayette and Mount Vernon contact me to tell me that they had places in their homes and hiding places. And a couple of them I actually went and saw. So I'll just throw that in there.
Yeah, if you could let me know any contacts that you have, because I don't have Fayette or Mount Vernon places. Any contact you can help with me with information, I'll get in touch with them and fill out my map a little bit more. I have to make it so
Okay.
people can actually read all the towns.
Well, we were just discussing, I've been doing it on the chat, is that we will be putting this recording on the town YouTube channel. It actually, Compton Library now has its own playlist, and I'm thinking that maybe we can work together to get your slideshow attached as well.
Okay.
Hopefully we can make that happen.
Okay, great.
So that people can see all of them, you know, in their entirety if they wanted to flip through them
Yeah.
at another time. So.
Awesome, terrific. Any other comments or questions out there? Glad to take them.
This has been so interesting. I'm Priscilla from 98 Main Street in Winthrop, and I'm just fascinated. This is so very cool. Thank you for your time tonight.
Oh, my pleasure doing it. And I want to thank the other people that contributed, especially have Amanda chime in and Hugh. That was really nice for you to join in, because I know they were here before, and so this is their time as well. And all that expertise. Hugh's got a lot in his brain cells. I have to mine them more someday. Okay, Hugh? We've been talking about
It's a deal. It's a deal.
Okay. Anybody else? Time is running out. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.